hihilahin to pag hindi bababa yung pangulo nila dito. Bumaba na daw pero ayaw lang daw magpirma. Pagtigas pa ng ulo.
This is Hong Kong Free Press coming to you live from Central. As you can see, hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-extradition bill protesters are now moving west on Connaught Road Central. Part of the march was originally meant to end at the Court of Final Appeal in Central, but the crowds here have walked way past that and are now approaching Sheung Wan. The front of the march had already reached Shun Tak Center in Sheung Wan, meaning that they have exceeded their original plans for their march today. We have spoken to a few protesters on the streets to ask what their plans are. Some say that they saw messages saying that the march now will head towards the China Liaison Office in Saiwan. That will be around 20 minutes walk away from where we are now. However, more of them said that they were mostly following the crowd walking out of solidarity, and they have no clear plans as of yet as to where their march will end. Protesters were originally only given permission by police to walk as far as Wan Chai. However, they have since been allowed to walk into Admiralty unobstructed, and they have continued to walk to Central. On the way, there seemed to be minimal police presence. There are heavy fortifications around the central government offices in Admiralty, the government headquarters in Admiralty, as well as the Legislative Council building, which was stormed on July 1st. However, despite the heavy fortifications, none of actual officers being spotted on the street level are currently minimal. Today's march saw thousands gather at Victoria Park and take this much used route from Causeway Bay to the government headquarters in Admiralty. However, this is the first time that the street protests and the street occupations have extended as far west as they currently have. We here are in the heart of the Central Business District here, the financial district of Central, and the street protests, even in 2014 or in recent months, have not extended as far as we have here. Some of the protesters earlier were heard chanting a slogan used by the jailed localist activist Edward Leung Tin Kei. It has to do with reclaiming Hong Kong and this being a revolution of our era. Many of the interviewees that we've spoken to did not want to appear on camera, and as you can see, many of them have worn face masks in part to obscure their identities. About 10 to 15 minutes ago, we saw that part of the eastbound lanes of Connaught Road Centre had been blocked as well, outside the one IFC office building. As we can see, we are outside Shuntak Center here, near the Wignon Center. Most of the protesters are concentrated on this one street, with the traffic in other lanes currently being unblocked. Despite most of the protesters here walking from Causeway Bay, they still are moving quite quickly, moving rapidly west towards the direction of the China liaison offices. The crowds here just parted for the ambulance to come through. press 幾多成間俾我問你兩句，需要兩嘅。我想問咧，即係而家以你理解係去緊邊？即係你行去邊？
我都唔係好知。
咁你有冇話睇過即係 Telegram 或者有咩 message， 或者有冇其他人話俾你聽而家？
我都唔知。
哦，咁你因為
我最知好似上到之後係去到
係啊，咁但係都冇係。
啊，即係可能因為 見翻同普通考嗰陣時，我覺得都需要學習。
哦，咁即係你今日係一個人嚟？
哦，有個 friend 佢咁啱，佢要同其他人一齊，可能配合咗先，我就唔知咯。
哦，咁你今日行係由維園一直行？
天后站即係去維園之後咁樣行過嚟呢個方向。
好啊好啊，介唔介意俾個姓氏？
我姓李。
哦，你好，唔該你。
李生喺度。
唔該晒你先。I've just spoken to a protester here on the scene in Shangwan outside Western Market. Mr. Lee, who did not want to appear on camera, a relatively young Mr. Lee in his 20s, told me that he walked all the way from Tin House Station, meaning he followed the march from its starting point in Causeway Bay all the way here. I asked him where he thinks he is going, and he tells me he has no idea. And I asked whether he had been told by other protesters or whether he had received messages on where they're headed, and he says he doesn't really know. He only knew that the most updated endpoint for the march was the Court of Final Appeal in Central. But he said he felt compelled to continue marching just in support of his companions. We have spoken to a few people on the scene, and the general impression seems that this is very much an ad hoc event, a scattershot, wildcat-style street occupation which has moved steadily west. I've just spoken to a couple of mass protesters who told me that they knew about the current escalation via the popular online forum LIHKG. They said that the LIHKG post said that the action right now is to head towards the China liaison office. I asked them when they started joining the march, and they said that they joined from the beginning at Victoria Park. I asked what did they expect to do once they arrived at the China liaison office, whether it will be some kind of surrounding action or any kind of other escalation, and they told me they don't know yet, they can't tell yet. This further reinforces the impression we have had here. Spoken to multiple protesters. They have told us that this is an ad hoc wildcat escalation, not really planned in advance. We don't even really see any talk about the China liaison office as of last night or this morning. It appeared in the space of a few hours, and now we can see hundreds of protesters have been mobilized to continue west. What you can see here are further obstructions to the road, new barricades being made, and buses and other cars turning back. We are about 5 to 10 minutes out from the location of the China liaison office. We're now here on Davao Road West. More makeshift barriers have been set up. Much of this intersection here is being blocked. This is about 5 minutes out from the China liaison office building. We will now proceed directly to the China liaison office to see the latest situation for the protests. Some protesters are directing traffic, telling them to turn back. A convenience store here has closed its shutters. And we now see umbrellas being opened. It seems there's a procession of protesters carrying barriers moving back east, possibly to block off more roads. They are extending the street barricades laterally and blocking off more of the roads here in Shengwan and nearing Saiwan. Protesters have carried makeshift barricades for quite a long way, in fact. They are carrying them back eastward. We're now back to the space outside. We're almost back to Shuntak Center. Metal barriers, bus stops being disassembled, and as to create a barricade here. All of this seems to be consistent with the reports we have received on the ground about protesters moving towards the China Liaison Office. We have quite a sturdy barricade here with metal barriers, umbrellas, multiple layers of metal gates. Nevertheless, we will continue to the China Liaison Office to see the situation there. Interestingly, the barricades were made at a location quite far away from China Liaison Office, with the expectation that protesters will no longer be there once they move on. However, it seems that they may be attempts to slow any police or other pursuers. Now there are shouts among protesters to ask for umbrellas. A protester has just spoken on the loudspeaker. He said that the roads in the vicinity of Shangwan and Saiwan here have been blocked, and there has been no clear police deployment on the street. The protesters said on the loudspeaker that the attendees here could choose what they want to do and how far they are willing to go. More roadblocks as we move closer to the China Liaison Office. We are now approaching, we are quickly approaching the China Liaison Office location. As we can see, many of the protesters have stopped. Some of them are resting by the roadside. The slogan for the jailed activist Edward Leung has been spray painted here. One says, "Reclaim Hong Kong." The other says, "The revolution for our era." Some of the protesters have started to resupply, and also they are disassembling metal railings and metal barriers, most likely to create more makeshift barricades. On the street here outside the China Liaison Office, we see more and more of the triangular barricades being made. We see at least a dozen, actually more. We are now outside the China Liaison Office building in Saiwa. Some of the protesters on the scene are shining flashlights and laser pointers at the building's facade. And earlier, we could see there were certain people inside who were looking out. There is no police presence at the street level at this time outside the China Liaison Office building in Saiwan. Our reporter on the scene, Chris, has just told me that the main entrance and the sign here, the placard with the name, has been protesters have thrown eggs at the entrance of the China Liaison Office building. On the scene, we can see hundreds of protesters, with more arriving. Many of them have open umbrellas. Most of them have worn protective gear as well. Both the sign on its entrance, the sign with its name, and also the PRC emblem have been hit with eggs thrown by protesters. protesters have continued their use of laser pointers against the facade of the China Liaison Office building. Some have deliberately aimed at the surveillance cameras installed on the exterior of the building. They have also used high-powered flashlights to flash the building. 我有我本身嗰個，我 OK 我 OK，之後後下啦。你首先你覺得會衝圍到？如果我會盡可能。唔係我遲嚟，我唔需要行開，你行開。咁但係夜晚升場啊，冇人清。喂，21點有冇印象咧？因為我記憶冇上一次係咪16年中聯辦，即係反折法咩？11月反折法。咁嗰次係點受？清場。Protesters have just spray painted the surveillance camera immediately outside the China Liaison Office building. The situation on the ground right now outside the China Liaison Office is relatively quiet, but also tense. There has been no police presence so far, and it is unclear what kind of escalation. We have seen intermittent loud thuds, which are protesters throwing eggs at the facade of the building. There doesn't seem to be many developments right now. The protesters, after having arrived at the China liaison office, have mostly stopped and are resting on the wayside. Some of them are resupplying, and some of them have shouted insults and taunts at the building, but no one has emerged from it. What we just saw were protesters spray painting one of the surveillance cameras outside the China liaison office. A surveillance camera attached outside has also been spray painted. to situation here inside the building. Hundreds of protesters have gathered here outside the China Liaison Office and have apparently surrounded it. They have blockaded certain nearby roads. They have egged the front entrance and also the PRC emblem at the facade, on the facade of the building itself. They have also, as is customary, they have defaced and sabotaged the surveillance cameras on the street level. They have either spray painted on the surveillance cameras, or they have used laser pointers and strong flashlights against them. The situation right now is quiet. There's no visible police presence. There has also been nobody that emerged from the China Liaison Office so far. The crowds right now are mostly resting on the roadside. They have worn face masks and other protective gear. Some are planning to read a statement outside the China Liaison Office.
in all corners of the world who care about Hong Kong. We are Hong Kong citizens who love our city dearly. Ever since early June of this year, millions of Hong Kongers have used various peaceful and non-violent means, including but not limited to marches and demonstrations, to convey to the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and the world our firm and reasoned commitment to safeguard our freedoms. Some protesters have even risked everything, including their personal safety, to occupy the Legislative Council building. Within roughly 1 month, a few brothers and sisters have sacrificed their own lives, hoping to give a much-needed wake-up call to conscience of those in power and to arouse the compassion of their fellow citizens. Sadly, all these sacrifices have only met with the government's cruel disregard and the chief executive's repeated refusal to withdraw the widely opposed Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill. What is even more unforgivable is the government's tactic of sustaining their disregard, which is to let the police abuse protesters justifiable excessive force, resulting in injuries of many. Meanwhile, the chief executive, high-ranking government officers and pro-establishment lawmakers have all refused to address to the people's demand, imagining that the political problems can be solved by assaulting citizens and viewing the people as their enemies. Today, we reiterate our 5 demands to the Hong Kong SAR government. We demand to, number 1, withdraw without any ambiguity the Fugitive Offenders Amendment Bill in order to officially terminate the legislative procedure of the bill. Number 2, withdraw the characterization of the June 12 conflicts as a riot. Number 3, dismiss all charges already made against all citizens who protested the Fugitive Offenders Amendment Bill and guarantee that no further charges will be made against protesters because of these incidents. Conduct an impartial investigation into the police's abuse of power. And number 5, dissolve the Legislative Council with an executive order and immediately implant genuine universal suffrage with direct election for both the chief executive and the Legislative Council. We love Hong Kong dearly, and we do not wish to see another drop of blood shed protecting our homeland, let alone another precious life lost. Yet, and let us stress this, there is no violent protesters or rioters. Tyranny. We will protect our homeland by any means. We urge the government to stop leading Hong Kong toward the brink of destruction and work together with the people to bring our city back to a democratic and free society. Thank you.
宣言嗰度提到話會排除成立臨時立法會，點解會有呢個訴求或者行動？
其實好多法例咧，其實翻唔翻講嘅，其實好似係唔想嗰條條例啦，但係因為建制派壟斷咗呢一個立法會，所以好多條例都做得出嚟，即係所以香港人其實佢哋想成立呢個立 哋應有嘅法，同埋可以更加符合到香港普遍加入條例會唔會係真係值得香港人係真係大多數有共識係會出嚟，所以香港人成立翻呢個立法會就可以更加符合到呢個主流意見，同埋唔會俾其他一啲嘅勢力啊，即係俾其他一啲即係總之就可以更加符合到香港嘅主流。
會幾時決定合作同埋會點做？
呢個仲係未決定。
但會唔會係上一個補選嘅立法會啦？
呢個其實大家都明白，係大家都重視嘅，咁所以再加埋我都即係我唔係代表大家都因為其實香港即係大家唔應該會有人去帶領我哋，其實應該係呢個時代就咁多嘢都係自發嘅，咁所以如果你話有冇人會問你咁，其實咁樣。如果應該係我哋都應該會做。
會去到乜嘢階段先決定做呢個國教會成立臨時立法會？
呢個我哋都
可唔可以話咩情況之下制定呢份事係乜啊？或者係咩情況之下，你有咩共識之下制定呢個事？
我哋點解會去中聯辦呢個地方咧？其實好明顯都容易睇話喺香港市民，我哋而家係要劍指呢一個政權，因為我哋好清楚林鄭月娥呢個香港政府咧，實際上係冇把任何力而呢一個月發生嘅所有嘢，我哋都好清楚，呢個政府都唔知自己做緊啲乜嘢，一時彈出彈入，一時又話有暴動，一時又話冇暴動，所以我哋而家所講嘅建立臨時立法會咧，好明顯就係要將我哋嘅訴求直接同中聯辦、中共講清講楚，要佢哋係接受我哋訴求，一係我哋就行動升級，係咁咯。行動升級係咩意思啊？請問叫做乜嘢？有冇呢啲乜嘢預備？具體嘅行動有冇回應咧？具體嘅行動係會點？具體行動，我哋暫時仲喺度計劃緊，而家未方面作任何嘅承諾。如果有任何發射消息，就會發佈會。冇嘢講，冇嘢講，冇嘢答㗎啦。好啦，散啦。
叫啲咩？跌咗嘢，聽唔到，跌咗嘢。好似係，我唔知邊個跌嘢，我以為係我自己，原來唔係。我跌嘢，唔緊要。
So what you saw just now for the past 5 to 10 minutes was a Chinese and an English statement respectively being read out by protesters. So we just saw a Chinese and an English statement being read out by protester representatives. There was a very brief Q&A afterwards, which focused on 2 main aspects. First, why was the action targeted at the China liaison office? The protester replied that it was to express dissatisfaction against the Chinese regime. The second question had to do with a partly new demand raised by the protesters in their statement. Most statements over the past month have focused on the 5 core demands. However, just now the protesters have said that the 5th demand, the so-called pursuing genuine universal suffrage or true democracy, that demand was slightly amended to read the chief executive should disband or dissolve the current legislative council using an executive order. It also said that because protesters have just thrown balloons filled with ink or paint, and the emblem of the People's Republic of China, the red and gold emblem on the front of the China Liaison Office, has been defaced. Returning to the earlier statement read by protesters, the protesters added a new demand, or they amended their demand to read that the chief executive should dissolve the current legislative council. They said that if the legislature is not representative of the people, they may consider forming their own temporary legislative council, but details are still lacking. In a surprise development, the protesters now are leaving the China Liaison Office. They are shouting, "Let's go back to Central." We were originally expecting a standoff or a siege of the China Liaison Office, but just about an hour or so after they arrived, they are now turning back. reports on the scene say that they may be turning back because of suspected police presence. Yo.
喂，而家由金鐘有物資站同埋張水站嗰啲嚟緊。
你可以講下。其實咧係你想講嘢？你覆佢 message？因為我有 live 緊，我覆唔到佢嘅。我哋點諗啊？我哋留都冇意思。唔係，如果啲人去中環係。唉，翻中環點知啊？我攞翻袋嘢嚟。我一次攞長凳推。We see in the distance, about more than 50 meters away, police presence, finally. Police presence about 100 meters away from the China Liaison Office has prompted protesters to signal a retreat. Some say that they are retreating back to Central. We have here riot police in green uniforms and helmets and long body-length shields. We also have a handful of police vans. Police are now heading inward. In. Police are now advancing east. Some of them are trying to divert into one of the inner streets in Taiwan. Police lines are now about 50 meters away from this barricade. Police are now holding their position about 50 to 100 meters away from the China Liaison Office. about 5 to 10 minutes earlier, protesters got wind that there are riot police now advancing on their position, and many have said that they are intending to return to Central. It is not clear whether they are simply dispersing or whether they have further protests planned for the night. We are now at the intersection of Connaught Road West and Cow On Street, where a line of riot police officers have stationed here, but they are now not yet pressing onward. We are now headed back towards the China Liaison Office to check on the situation there, to see whether the protesters have indeed dispersed. We have just heard a loud shout. Police are now advancing. it seems that the majority of protesters outside the China Liaison Office building main entrance had already dispersed. In fact, little to no protesters remain here outside the China Liaison Office. Protesters had called for a retreat to Central some 10 minutes ago. But as we saw earlier, a large number of protesters had not left the area entirely. Instead, they have simply retreated into the inner streets. Protesters have set up this makeshift barricade here. However, moments ago, they have just called for a retreat. There were heavy protester presence here just a few moments ago, but they are now on the retreat en masse. The reason given by some protesters was that there were not enough numbers to sustain this point. In the distance, less than 100 meters away, we see riot police with their shields now moving forward. So on the left here, we see the crowd of protesters moving back fairly swiftly. And on the other side, we see police and reporters in front of them. We are now at the location of the makeshift barricades, but they have been have been abandoned by protesters. The riot police on the other street on Connaught Road West had advanced,
保留原地嘅。
係啊，好一唔搞。
緩慢地向前推進應該 OK 㗎啦。市民已經向後退啦，千祈唔好奔跑，留意翻你嘅心跳，留意翻你嘅頭腦有冇保持冷靜。記住，你哋手持武器有警惕同埋品行，唔好嚇親市民，因為互相嘅好啲街坊，我亦都係喺側邊同學翻學，平時生活嘅。
So we are now at in Taiwan.
稍微等一等，等佢哋自己行好啦。因為你接觸嗰，即係佢哋會翻轉頭保護佢哋自己啲朋友嘅，所以大家都就產生死嘅。有啲時間反而仲好，容易解決個問題。
I'm observing some of the frontline officers here. The riot police do not appear to show their identification. I'm looking at the riot police here in front of me. I don't see warrant cards. I don't see their officer IDs being displayed anywhere. Just now we saw Law Yuk Kai of the Human Rights Monitor. He was in a orange T-shirt. Law was telling frontline police officers that the protesters are dispersing on their own, and the situation would be better if the police gave the protesters some time. The police has pushed ahead to this intersection of Davao Road West. A brief look at the scene in Taiwan right now reveals that most protesters, if not all of them, have left. I'm looking at more police officers here on the front line. Again, no warrant card. We just saw a man who said he was living in the neighborhood and was asking how he could go home given the current police deployment. Police originally told him to wait or to take another path, but he has been let through. It appears that there are a few elderly protesters here on the scene, and they are trying to protect younger protesters. And the other people have told them that the younger protesters have actually all left, and they're now trying to talk these last few remaining elderly protesters to leave the scene. We might examine the gear of the riot police in a bit more detail while we have them here. As I said earlier, all of the riot police we saw did not have any warrant cards. They did not display their officer ID numbers. We can see that some of them have stuck a reflective pieces of paper on the top of their shields or in their helmets, presumably to deflect laser pointers. However, a side effect of that is that they become even harder to identify. We have received local media reports saying that the police has announced their clearance operation here in Taiwan. In front of me, you see a line of riot police who has pushed as far as the Western Police Station now. Western Police Station on Davao Road West, quite near Sayang Pun MTR station exits, in fact. Slightly more than 50 meters behind me, there are some people with helmets retreating, but it is unclear from this distance whether they are protesters or press. On site outside the Western Police Station, we mostly see reporters in front of a line of riot police. There are definitely more than 50, possibly 100 riot police officers here. There are also a number of bystanders who are simply residents in the local neighborhood. To briefly recap the situation here, outside the Western Police Station here on Deville Road West. Most of the protesters on the scene have already left. They had said slightly, almost an hour ago actually, that they're going to go back to Central. The Civil Human Rights Front, the CHRF, the body responsible for organizing the protest march today in the afternoon, have released their attendance figures. The Civil Human Rights Front have said that 430,000 people have joined the march this afternoon. The organizer of the protest march has put the turnout figure at 430,000 people. Lawmaker Roy Kwong from the Democratic Party is here. We are now live at Saiwan with Lawmaker Roy Kwong outside the Western Police Station, facing down a line of riot police officers.
手术嘅專業。咁而家現場見到咧，大部分都係警察啦，咁跟住咧亦都有記者啦，同埋有少量嘅居民。
In the back, behind these, the riot police dressed in black, the so-called Raptors. The Raptor team, which are even more, they are leaving apparently. But there were multiple varieties of riot police on the scene. So far, we've seen Democratic Party lawmaker Roy Kwong and also Ted Hui on the scene. Police are currently holding their positions, not yet advancing, but it seems that there are few protesters, if any, left on the streets here in Taiwan. We find a cluster of protesters about 2 blocks away, where the police is now. Some protesters earlier had said they would retreat back towards Central after an impromptu action at the China Liaison Office. We're now at the intersection of Center Street and Davao Road West. It seems that the riot police are now using a surround containment tactic, but they have not yet reached this intersection as yet. We now have a few dozen protesters still maintaining their position at the intersection of Center Street and Davao Road West. There is heated debate as to whether they should retreat. The police front line has not yet moved for the past 5 to 10 minutes. It is still at the Western Police Station. We are receiving reports of protests in Central. We are now here outside the Western Police Station in Saiwan. We are receiving reports of protests in Central. We will relocate and possibly have new live video in Central shortly, and we will be concluding this live stream. For a detailed report of today's protests and later events, please visit our website for our most updated coverage.